lovely people, welcome back to another Story Study Saturday. I'm Sammy, and I'm a writer who likes to learn about writing through reading and share what I learn with you. This week is different because I fully was just invested in this story, and I was just gonna write my 2-sentence reaction to it originally, so I wasn't really thinking super hard while I was listening to this audiobook. I wasn't digesting anything, but then when I finished it, I was like, oh my god, there is so much that was done really well in this book. So I just sort of brain dumped all of the things that I really enjoyed about it onto a page. And then recently, a while after I finished it, I went through all of my thoughts on it, and then I thought harder about things that I thought maybe could be improved. I didn't come up with many, and things that writers can learn from it. So I wanted to share because I really enjoyed this book, and I want to be able to talk about things that I enjoyed, even if I didn't spend my time engaging with the story, fully analyzing and processing and thinking like a writer about it. Sometimes you can learn stuff from reading just by reading and experiencing, and knowing what you experienced was really beneficial to you. So this book is Little Fires Everywhere by Celeste Ng. Is that how you say it? So because I wasn't prepared to talk about it, I'm gonna read the summary from Goodreads and give you that reference point. Everyone in Shaker Heights was talking about it that summer. How Isabel, the last of the Richardson children, had finally gone around the bend and burned the house down. In Shaker Heights, a placid, progressive suburb of Cleveland, everything is meticulously planned. From the layout of the winding roads to the colors of the houses to the successful lives its residents will go on to lead. And no one embodies the spirit more than Elena Richardson, whose guiding principle is playing by the rules. Enter Mia Warren, an enigmatic artist and single mother who arrives in this idyllic bubble with her teenage daughter Pearl and rents a house from the Richardsons. Soon, Mia and Pearl become more than just tenants. All 4 Richardson children are drawn to this mother-daughter pair. But Mia carries with her a mysterious past and a disregard for the rules that threatens to upend this carefully ordered community. When old family friends attempt to adopt a Chinese-American baby, a custody battle erupts that dramatically divides the town and puts Mia and Elena on opposing sides. Suspicious of Mia and her motives, Elena is determined to uncover the secrets in Mia's past. But her obsession will come at an unexpected and devastating cost. That is a much longer summary than I would have written, but it does cover everything that happens in a really detailed way. And this book has a lot of aspects in it that makes it somewhat more difficult to summarize in a quick 1-paragraph method. So into some of my thoughts that I kind of just vomited onto the page. I'm really intrigued by this world and the group of people that are in it, because it seems like every character is in fact fully their own person. Not in the way that side characters have to have whatever's going on and not just centrally be focused on the main character, but in the way that every character is kind of the main character for a little bit, and it's impossible to know whose story it really is while you're in it, while you're invested in it. I think the way that the summary is written, it kind of feels like it's centered around Mia and Elena, but while you're reading it, all of the kids have their highlighted central focus, and they all have their own things that are going on, and all of the things interweave into each other, and it's done so well, so well. All of the characters are so fully fleshed out that while you may feel more drawn to one character or more empathetic towards one character, they are all each given their own importance and the same level of that importance. Even the characters that are introduced in a way that makes it feel okay, this is a side character, they'll still get their moment in the spotlight where you'll get to see the world through their eyes and experience this small little neighborhood from their perspective. And it's so interesting to navigate that, because you're okay, I've got this information of this character filed away by the perspective that this other character has on this character. And then when you switch to their perspective, it's wow, I was not expecting that. And it kind of just gives you this really detailed view into how everybody is their own person. And that's missing from so many books where it's okay, yeah, side characters exist. They're all here to just further the main character's story. What the main character has going on is just being sprinkled in by having people around them. And it's good. It's so good. So well done. It's so unique. It's such a unique experience to have as a reader that I was flabbergasted. I got 60% of the way through the book and I was I don't know who the main character is. And I like it. Reading this book as someone who has no interest in being a mother at all, and having so many of the centralizing points of the story be focused around motherhood, the perspective of motherhood, who is a mother, how a mother's intent affects affects their children and the children's lives outcomes and their behaviors, how children who feel like they're in a perspective where they don't have mothers will go and find a mother figure, and like all of this sort of like mother-centric storytelling. The concept is approached from so many different angles that it's fully engaging. Even though the concept of motherhood is not something that I'm like, oh yeah, I want to read that book. If it was like part of the story's description, I wouldn't be like, oh yeah, that sounds like it's right up my alley. But because it wasn't, it's very interesting to see how that plays into all of the things that happen, because it's tied in with everything. Because the two characters that are focused on in the summary are both mothers, and they're both mothers in very different ways. And like you can see the differences between the different ways that the kids are being parented really clearly through Moody and Pearl. And when they recognize the distance in their relationship, how they react to it comes from who their mothers are and what their mothers have taught them and how they've been parented as they're coming up. Because like fathers aren't really addressed very much in this. They're not really like important to the process of the story. And that's saying something, since almost all of the characters have their moment in the spotlight. Father characters not really getting that much time. And the concept of motherhood is really highlighted when you get this battle for custody of this Chinese American baby, because you have like Mei Ling, the baby's birth mother, and then Elena's friend who wants to adopt this baby, who's had this like battle with fertility and all of this stuff and her desperate want to be the mother of a child. And what actually makes somebody a good mother is like the discussion that's being held through all of the people in this community. And everybody's taking sides. Either the birth mother is going to have a better access to this child's identity and what they come from and their history, or this adoptive mother is going to be able to provide better financial situations, a better life to grow in, and more consistency and routine and all of those kinds of things. And you see this juxtaposition so clearly identified through Elena's reactions to it and Mia's reactions to it, where Mia has all of the empathy in the world for this like love and like human connection between mother and daughter, where Elena has the opposite, full like, you should be able to give this child the best life they can possibly have. You should be stable. You should have all of these things. And you see their values as parents totally, completely put out, laid on the table in a way that's not a common occurrence should there not have been this like custody battle. You wouldn't have people actively speaking out what they think makes a good mother the way that these characters are doing openly during this situation. It's a super interesting like butting of heads between these two characters on the concept of like right and wrong, where neither side is fully right and neither side is fully wrong, and you're put into a position with this shifting of character focus that everybody kind of has your empathy until the next person has your empathy, and then they don't have your empathy as the previous character doesn't have as much of your empathy, because you're empathizing so much with this character that you have to really know who you are and where you take a stand, because this book is taking you fully. It's going to show you all of the characters, all of the different motivations and drives and all of these things. It's going to tell you what's going on fully for those characters, and you will know where all of them are coming from, and you'll have to figure out either like, I'm just here for the ride, or where you actually stand. And it comes from like this, you have to know in your heart where you stand on this situation. Otherwise, you're just going to be taken back and forth like a pendulum, and it's absolutely wild and an amazing experience to have as a reader. And I thoroughly admire the fluid way that the story just sort of traipses through different mental spaces, because it's written in this limited third person perspective where you see from one character's perspective at a time, but it's not the whole time. And it just sort of like shifts, like you get into a location and then you see another character and then you start to see from that character's perspective, and it's all very, very smooth. And you don't realize that it changes until it's changed. And it's like, oh my gosh, I was there the whole time. I know who we're like thinking as, and I understand why we're thinking as this character, but I don't remember when we switched, because I know we were thinking as another character and now we're thinking as this character, and it's so interesting. There was so much thinking that I did during this listen of this audiobook that I'm flabbergasted at how well it was done and how smooth and fluid it was, that I just had to pour out my thoughts onto the page without like formatting it like a video, because I thought it was just going to be for me in my head, but I just want to share. So After a while, this is the only thing that I came up with as something that I thought could be improved. And mind you, it was a little bit like a distance from having read the book, or I guess listened to the book, read the book with my ears, because I wasn't planning to make a video on it. So maybe I would have come up with more things if this had been where my mind space was when I first finished reading the book, was to look for these things, but I wasn't. So what I wrote down for improvements, I am now feeling like is actually a strength that the story had. So we're gonna take it with a grain of salt now that I'm sitting down and actually speaking out my thoughts. I wrote down that I thought it could be improved, that there weren't many clear transitions from perspective to perspective. But I think that that is a like diamond in the rough of this story. I think that's a very specific thing that this story does in a way that makes it a unique experience. It does make it a little bit more confusing if you like zoned out a little bit in the audiobook and you miss that like moment where the perspective switches, and it doesn't necessarily say the character super often. Like it's a lot of she and her and pronouns and just like her perspective on this situation. If you miss it, you missed it and you have to keep going. But I don't think that that's something that is a negative so much as maybe a reading problem that I had. Maybe not like the best, most active reading perspective I have done. But onwards to things that I think we can learn from this book. The story's timeline is really condensed. Like it takes place in a small period of time in the grand scheme of things. But the stakes are so high for that short period of time that it's very like engaging and thorough and like very detailed, where if it was more expansive over the period of time, the stakes may have felt less intense. But I think it does a really good job of putting really high stakes into a small period of time while also touching on things that happened prior to that time in a way that still impacts the stakes of the moment. We're told a story from the history of one of the characters' lives. I'm gonna be vague so I don't spoil anything. And that history is told as like, this is something you need to know in this moment. The stakes remain contained into this small period of time. And the only reason we find out about that historical event, personal history event, is because it is important to the stakes in the moment. And I think that's so interesting and so well done and so detail focused. Like, you really, the only reason we know about this is because we have to know about it. And it can be so difficult to think, like, I've come up with all of this backstory, I need to find a spot to put it in. There's gotta be some way that we know that this character comes from this history, and like, you want to just sprinkle it in. But having dedicated purpose behind why that backstory is coming in, instead of just having it in your author head to describe and navigate your character's motivations for things without telling all of the details, it can be really disappointing to like not put stuff in. But when you hold back the backstory until it's really, really important and super, super juicy, it's way more interesting. It's way more interesting to the reader. And I loved it. If they started off and they were like, this is how this happened, this is where we're going, this is the story, it wouldn't have been as impactful. But because it was put in at a moment that that information was pertinent to the characters to be able to continue on and like continue processing forward, top tier. Top tier. Another thing we can learn from this is the process of intertwining your characters together. How do you weave the net of the characters that are important to this story? Who's connected to who? Why are they connected? What impact does that connection to this character have on this character's connection to that character, and all of that kind of stuff? It's so intricate and such a small area. Like, it's the suburbs. It's the suburbs. Everybody knows each other. That makes sense. But also, the people that run in certain circles are going to overlap very rarely with the people who run in other circles, and seeing how they interact and what their ties are is super interesting, and it does such a good job. I cannot express how good of a job it does. And in that, this is also an amazing example of a story without a real main character, without like a focus main character, without a character whose story it is. It's all of these characters' story. All of the characters are so important to what goes on that it's not none of their stories. It's not any of their story. If one of these characters was not present in the story would not have happened the same way. And that, I think, is really interesting. It's unique having so many characters. There's so many characters. There are 4 Richardson kids: Elena, Pearl, Mia, Mei Ling, the lady whose name escapes me who wanted to adopt Mei Ling's baby, some other characters. I want to keep the details out, so I'm not, like, I can't remember their names. There are 11 characters that we get to see their perspective from for at least one chapter or one section of a chapter, and all of them are so important to our complete understanding of what goes on. And it's I don't want to say interesting again. It's kind of magical to see how many people made this story happen. The story is also technically a historical fiction, but it's not like super far back. It's not like way historical. So it has ties to the timeline, to the era that it takes place in, without making it like super obvious that it takes place in a specific time. It's timeless while also being placed in a historical time. The way that the story progresses, it's entirely timeless. Everything that happens in that could happen today. The only difference is it's set fully into the time that it's placed in by the technology that's available. And you know from either life experience or, if you are younger, television, how the lives of people worked in the 90s prior to like cell phones, and how people interacted with their friends, and how they got from place to place, and house phones. And like, I just liked what time it was set in as a historical fiction. I also think this book has some really, really effective symbolism. And I know that comes from the fact that Mia is an artist, so you have to kind of navigate the intricacies of being an artist, being a visual artist, and telling information through media. And that kind of just naturally creates symbolism. But it's done so well and so rewarding when you understand what the message is. And you see her working on some of these projects as time goes on. And then once you see the pieces all come together in the final composition, you're like, oh wow, look at that. And we knew it was just oh my gosh, truly just very rewarding symbolism, very well done symbolism. This book hits a lot of different points, and it's a very interesting thing to experience with so much distance from it. Like, I fully just chose this book because it was available as an ebook, and I didn't want to be in silence while I was working on something. I don't even remember what at this point. There was so much impact of the story that I was like, I've never been happier that I picked this up. But let me know what your thoughts are on this book. Have you read it? Are you thinking about reading it? Have you seen the TV show? All of the things. Talk to me in the comments. I love to hear it, love to talk about it. That's all that I've got for this video. Thank you so much for joining me along on this kind of rambly ride. I really appreciate it if you made it to the end of the video. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a like. That'll really help me out and help this video find other people who might enjoy the content. If you don't want to miss any of my uploads, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell next to it. I put out one video every week, either on Tuesday for a writing-centric video or on Saturday for other story study videos like this. If you don't want to miss any of those, make sure you hit that button. I will see you guys next week.